They said the night itself could hear. That somewhere beyond the orchard hedgerows, past the broken stone walls and the hushed fields, under a pale moon, the enemy listened to every spark of electricity and every breath of static. And then, when the radio stuttered and died, a small shape slipped from the shadow of a ruined barn. Tail low, eyes bright, a canvas tube secured to his collar. His name painted in neat white letters on a black leather strap was Tommy. A black and white frame shows Normandy in silhouette, narrow lanes stitched with hedges, farmhouse roofs slumped under the weight of weeks-old dust, and a low mist hugging the earth like a held breath. It is the early hours after midnight, June turning to July 1944. The world is gray and silver and ash. The only color that exists is memory. In the far distance, muffled thunder rolls, not a storm, but artillery somewhere out of view, smudging the horizon, close to the ground. We feel what Tommy feels. The wetness of churned soil between pads, a thread of wind running along a ditch, the resin-sharp scent of crushed pine and cordite and sweat. He pauses, head lifted. He listens in a way radios cannot. A patrol slides past 5 figures in British webbing, faces camouflaged with soot, the corporal's hand slicing the air in a silent halt. Tommy looks to him once, quick and sure, as if returning a salute, then slips into the hedgerow's tunnel of leaves. Hours earlier, the message center in a makeshift command post had watched its field sets flicker and sputter. The operators, sleeves rolled high and fingers black with grease pencil, traded headshakes and muttered curses. In a landscape that swallowed wire and scattered signal, the lines that knit the battalion together had frayed to threads. A runner could try, yes, but runners bled time and drew fire. Motorcycles were faster, but the lanes were mined and cratered, engines too loud in a night that punished noise. And so a sergeant with the patient eyes of a kennel master had clipped a tube to Tommy's collar, crouched nose to nose, and whispered something that wasn't quite a command and wasn't quite a prayer. Now, in the cool hush between bursts of distant gunfire, Tommy moves like water. He knows these lanes in a way maps pretend to. He threads the shadow side of walls, noses under splintered gates, and darts across open patches with a speed that feels like a secret. When he pauses, it is for reasons that resist words. A drift of smell that doesn't belong to the hedgerow, a faint metallic tang that means steel and oil and men who smoke a different tobacco. He lowers himself into the ditch, breath steady. The camera lingers on the tight leather strap at his throat. Tommy, letters worn by rain, by handling, by someone's careful hand. In the command post, the captain studies a paper layered with pencil arrows, his finger tracing a route that depends on speed and silence. He doesn't look at the map as much as he looks through it, willing the lines to hold, the companies to stay aligned along a hedge he's never seen in daylight. A runner waits by the door, boot tapping, but the sergeant of dogs, hands cross-hatched with years of leads and training lines, says simply, "Give him 5 minutes more," in black and white. We see the captain's jaw unclench by a fraction. He nods. The paradox settles in an age of machines that speak across miles, of planes that carry cities' worth of power in their bellies. The fate of a night's advance might hinge on 4 quiet paws and a heartbeat. Tommy edges around a wrecked cart. He slides between leech-dry planks, emerges into a chalky lane where the moon catches the fringe of his fur. He breaks into a trot, then a run fast enough to outrun luck. Not so fast he misses the story the ground is telling. There is wire ahead, but it's old and taut by the wrong hands, and he skirts it with an easy curve as if he'd laid it there himself. A black and white scene shows his silhouette flatten against a stone wall while 2 enemy sentries murmur beyond the bend, their voices a low thread. Tommy's ears prick, his nose maps the air. He waits for the pause between words, the micro-silence when neither man is breathing out, and he is gone, just a smudge of motion that leaves only the whisper of leaves returning to stillness, somewhere behind. A platoon holds a farmstead and calls it a line. Their signal set is a sullen Dead weight. The corporal there has lines under his eyes cut by hours of listening to nothing. He glances at the village church spire, a black needle against the sky, noting how the wind shifts the bell rope through a broken louver. He is thinking in times 10 minutes to the crossroads, 4 to the ditch, 2 to the bend where men disappear. He doesn't know if the captain's plan still lives beyond the paper it was born on. He only knows that messages, like veins, must keep blood moving. Tommy clears the last hedgerow with a low bound, lands in the open yard of the farmstead, and freezes. A shape rises from shadow the corporal. Hand up, palm out. The universal sign. Easy. The men who had learned to measure their hope in inches cannot quite keep their faces from opening. They come forward carefully, as if the night might snatch the dog back. The corporal kneels. The canvas tube is unscrewed, and paper, sweat soft but legible, unfolds with a rasp like dry grass. Orders are read, and the stillness changes shape. Now it has intent. Position shift. A Bren team realigns to the left gate. A pair of riflemen melt to a window with a view on the lane. The corporal taps the message for the runner to see, then returns to Tommy what all good messengers want. Purpose. A hand pats the dog's chest. Another note is slid into the tube reply. Acknowledgement. A small wedge of certainty driven into the night. Tommy waits for the single click of a tongue, the shape of permission. When it comes, he turns without flourish and darts back into the dark like a thought that refuses to be forgotten. We cut to the command post's doorway, a square of light spilled on churned ground. The captain stands centered, head tilted, listening to what no one else can. The sergeant of dogs doesn't watch the lane. He watches the captain's shoulders, the angle of his breath. In the map room, a pencil hovers over an arrow that looks less like graphite and more like a promise. For a heartbeat. The film slows. We study the collar's threadbare edges, the fur worn glossy where countless hands have steadied him, the quiet resolve in eyes that have learned the roots of fear and move through them anyway. Radios will be repaired, lines will be relayed, but for the moments when the wires go dark and the sky is a ceiling of listening ears, there remains this, a living courier who cannot read a map yet never loses the way, who cannot speak a word yet carries sentences that decide whether dawn means advance or retreat. Tommy slips around the final bend. The command post's lamp, now a dull square in the hedgerow's mouth. He slows, ears up, and trots into the rectangle of light as the sergeant kneels, smiling not wide, just enough for the mouth to remember how. Fingers work the cap. Paper slides free, and the captain exhales for the first time in minutes. The message is short, but its meaning expands to fill the room. Received. Ready? Moving on your mark. Outside. Normandy holds its breath. Inside. A plan becomes action, because a dog did what the night asked of him. In a war where machines define the century, a simple truth returns like a tide. When the radios went silent, the old language sent. Path. Instinct still spoke through 4 paws and a beating heart. And somewhere between the orchard and the map table, the fragile thread between men was tied, not by wire, but by trust. Now the question is no longer if the message will arrive. It's what it will cost to keep the line alive when the night grows louder. And as the captain folds the reply and reaches for the next order, we step toward the reason this story endures, toward the promise of what Tommy and his handlers were trained to do when silence threatened to swallow an army. The room still smelled of sweat and kerosene when the captain folded the message. The paper crackled faintly, a small sound in the hush that followed relief. Outside, dawn was a gray wash slowly erasing the stars. The men in the command post didn't cheer. They only looked at one another, the kind of glance soldiers share when something fragile has just been saved and no one dares name it aloud. In the silence, the captain's eyes found the sergeant of dogs. He made it, he asked, as if asking the question made the fact real. The sergeant nodded once. Aye, sir. Straight there and back. Not a sound. Tommy was lying near the doorway, chest rising and falling, eyes half closed but alert to every creak and shuffle. He had run through miles of dark that men hesitated to walk. Now his tail thumped once soft, almost embarrassed when the captain knelt and set his hand gently on the dog's shoulder. A black and white shot lingers, a man's hand on fur dusted with mud, the paper tube gleaming faintly in the new light. The scene feels ordinary, but its ordinariness is what hides the miracle. Because what Tommy had just done wasn't a stunt. It was a system, a hidden artery inside the British Army's vast body during the Second World War. When radios failed, when wires were cut, when artillery drowned every human voice, dogs like Tommy became the messengers who stitched the battlefield back together. Few ever heard of them. Fewer still survived long enough to be named in dispatches. But without them, whole units would have vanished in confusion, trapped between noise and silence. The question the audience feels now, the one hanging over the flickering lamplight, is simple but haunting. How many lives can one small messenger save when the machines go dark? To understand why the British turned to dogs, you must first grasp the chaos of communication in 1944. Radios were revolutionary, yes, but fragile. They required power, line of sight, frequency coordination, and they screamed their position to any German operator tuned to the right wavelength. The ether above Normandy was a battlefield of its own, full of jamming, counter-jamming, phantom voices, and bursts of static that sounded like rain on tin. Wired telephones. They were worse. Every shell, every tank track, every retreating vehicle cut them like cobwebs. Runners, men carrying handwritten messages, died by the thousands in the First World War. Commanders in this new war swore not to repeat that slaughter. So Britain built something quieter. In 1942, the War Office established the War Dog Training School at Potter's Bar, later moved to Northolm. There, under trainers like Lellet, Kolb, Edwin Richardson, a new kind of soldier was forged not in words, but in scent, repetition, and absolute trust. Dogs learned to carry messages sealed in waterproof tubes clipped to their collars. They memorized routes between units and could navigate by smell and terrain, even under fire. They ran low to the ground, nearly invisible. And unlike radios, they made no noise the enemy could trace. Every successful run was a thread that kept an army from unraveling. Every failure could mean hundreds of men cut off without orders. And this is where the story begins to deepen, because Tommy was not just a pet trained for tricks. He was a signal in motion, a living line between command and chaos. Imagine the stakes of that one night we've just witnessed. If Tommy hadn't returned, the captain's assault plan would have died in the mud. The left flank would have waited in the dark for orders that never came. The Germans would have counterattacked at dawn. And by noon, the farmhouse would have been smoke. That single piece of paper, carried in silence by a dog's steady heart, changed the shape of the battlefield. It's easy to forget, in an age of satellites and instant signals, that war once depended on instincts older than language. These dogs operated in the narrow gap between human technology and human fear. They didn't ask why. They didn't waver when shells fell. They simply went. In war diaries preserved by the British War Office, there are dozens of such accounts. A dog named Judy swimming between sinking ships in the Pacific, carrying coded papers in her mouth. Ricky, who delivered messages across mined fields in Holland and saved wounded men by alerting medics. Bing, a parachuting Alsatian who jumped with airborne troops into Normandy and carried dispatches under sniper fire. Tommy could have been any of them, or all of them. His story stands for the hundreds whose paw prints were washed away by rain and time. A black and white sequence replays. Soldiers crouched in shadow, a hand tying a message tube, the brief flick of a tail before vanishing into the night. The narrator's voice is low, reverent. History often remembers the machines, the tanks, the guns, the planes, but between those machines were moments where everything stopped working, and something alive stepped forward. That's why this story matters. It isn't about nostalgia or sentiment. It's about the fragile, human scale of survival in a world that tried to become mechanical. It's about the way life soft, breathing. Vulnerable life carried meaning when wires and metal could not. The men who trained Tommy were not poets, but they understood poetry of another kind. the rhythm of trust, the quiet of obedience, the line between command and companionship. Their reports read like manuals. But between the lines, you can feel the heartbeat of respect. Dog completed course from HQ to forward company. 1 to 3 miles, under fire. Returned with reply. No hesitation. No hesitation. That phrase appears again and again. In a war of hesitation where every decision cost lives, these dogs embodied decisiveness without ego, courage without cruelty. As dawn strengthens outside the command post, Tommy stirs again. The captain orders a runner to fetch water. The sergeant kneels, checks the dog's paws torn slightly, caked with mud. He doesn't speak, but his touch says what the record books will not. Soon, another message will come, another run. And though the men have radios to repair and maps to redraw, they now know something that will outlast the war. When the night takes the voices away, they still have one messenger who never needed words. A faint wind moves through the broken window, rattling the paper on the table. The captain glances once more at Tommy, and then at the map of Normandy pinned to the wall. Dozens of lines cross it, pencil roads, unit marks, coded notes. All those lines mean nothing without connection. And connection, for this single morning, has a name and 4 muddy paws. The camera slowly pulls back through the window, out into the gray dawn. A single line of narration closes the scene. Calm and steady, when silence threatened to end the mission. A message still moved because one soldier carried it not in a machine, but in his heart. In the next moments, you'll discover how this unlikely system of loyalty and instinct, men and dogs working as one, kept entire battalions alive across Europe. How training, trust, and courage turned ordinary animals into the most reliable couriers of the war. And how, on one impossible morning in Normandy, Tommy would face the run that no map recorded, through a storm that no signal could survive. Spring, 1944, southern England. The air is thick with secrecy. Every lane smells faintly of petrol, chalk dust, and salt blown in from the channel, across fields bordered by hedgerows. The British Army is rehearsing for an invasion whose name no one is yet allowed to say aloud: Operation Overlord. A black and white frame fades in, a wide camp of canvas tents and wooden huts. Lines of men queue for breakfast, enamel mugs steaming. Nearby, another line forms shorter, quieter. At its head, a sergeant in a weathered leather jacket kneels beside a kennel runny. Inside sit the other soldiers who will never wear helmets or shoulder straps, shepherds, collies, Labradors, each trained not for attack, but for silence. Tommy, the smallest of them, watches through the mesh. His ears tilt toward every sound: the rattle of pots, the crack of boots on gravel, the far-off rumble of a lorry changing gear. But it isn't food or noise that holds him. It's rhythm, marching boots, distant but steady, the sound of order in a world that's about to become chaos. The sergeant, James Hargreaves, scratches the back of Tommy's neck. "You'll go farther than most of us." "Let," he murmurs. His tone is half joke, half omen. Hargreaves is a veteran of the last war, the one they called the Great. He remembers the trenches, the runners who never came back, and the dogs that did. When the call came to train new war dogs for dispatch duty, he volunteered again. Machines fail. He told the officer at Northaw, "Hearts don't." The camera pans across a training field marked with wooden posts. Each post bears a number. Between them, soldiers kneel beside dogs, whispering words that don't appear in any manual. Find, carry, return. It looks simple. It isn't. Each route must be memorized by scent, by pattern, by the invisible geography of trust. A whistle blows. The field comes alive. Dogs dart from one post to another, tubes strapped to collars, tails slicing through the mist. Trainers crouch, signaling with gestures learned through months of repetition. There is no shouting here. Every sound is measured, every silence deliberate. Hargreaves keeps his stopwatch ticking as Tommy bolts down a narrow path between two hedges. At the far post, another handler kneels, calling softly. The dog reaches him, drops into a sit, and allows the message tube to be unfastened. Hargreaves writes in a notebook, Route 2B. 4 miles completed under 4 minutes. No deviation, no hesitation. The last phrase again, no hesitation, a quiet code for perfection. Inside a briefing tent nearby, officers study the larger picture. Communication is the Army's bloodstream. They remind each other, without it, even victory becomes confusion. Wireless sets are essential, but unreliable near heavy metal and humidity. Landlines can't be trusted during bombardment. Pigeons still serve, but birds die easily, and jamming by falcons or flak can erase them from the sky. So the War Office has authorized an experiment. Messenger dogs. Category A. They'll carry coded notes, small reels of film, even identification tags from isolated units. Their work will be unrecorded. Their success measured in missions that never make headlines. The black and white film cuts to an underground bunker at headquarters, Portsmouth. Maps of Normandy sprawl across tables. Thin black strings connect command centers to beaches with names no one yet knows. Gold, Juno, Sword. Each string represents radio frequency and wired communication lines. A colonel taps one of the strings and sighs. We'll lose half of these by the first bombardment. Someone else suggests contingency couriers. The colonel nods. Then we'll need 4-legged ones, quiet ones. Fade back to the kennels. Rain patters on the tin roofs. Hargreaves writes a list on a clipboard. Tommy, primary messenger. Short range. Scout, fallback. Rex, long-range night runs. Each dog is paired with one handler. A bond built through daily drills and shared routines. They eat together, rest together, and march side by side. The men joke that the dogs outrank them. The truth is closer than humor allows. That night, the camera follows Hargreaves and Tommy during a test run under blackout conditions. Lamps are shielded. The world is reduced to sound and smell the crunch of boots, the whisper of wind over grass, the far click of a rifle bolt. A flare rises over the coastal training range, casting long shadows that stretch like ghosts. Tommy freezes, eyes reflecting the light like twin mirrors. Steady, Hargreaves whispers. The word has no command in it. It's reassurance. Tommy waits until the light fades, then moves again. The camera cuts to the stopwatch seconds sliding by like raindrops. When the dog returns, chest heaving, Hargreaves crouches and rests his forehead against Tommy's for a heartbeat. No words, just breath. Weeks later, orders come down from high command. The invasion is imminent. Every dispatch team receives sealed instructions. Hargreaves reads his under a flickering bulb. Assigned to 6th Airborne Division, Normandy. Communication supplement. His thumb traces the edge of the paper. He knows what it means. When the landings begin, chaos will follow. Radios will jam. Units will scatter. And in that confusion, the messenger dogs will run where men can't. A line of trucks waits in the dawn. Dogs are loaded into modified crates. Handlers beside them. Each crate bears a painted symbol, a small paw print beside a lightning bolt. The convoy rolls out through the mist. Somewhere above, the drone of bombers fills the sky like the hum of destiny. The black and white lens follows their journey south toward the coast, passing villages shrouded in secrecy. Civilians glimpse the strange cargo dogs bound for war and look away quickly, unsure if they've seen something heroic or heartbreaking. At the embarkation docks, the handlers lead their dogs onto landing craft. Tommy hesitates at the ramp just a single step, then climbs aboard. Water slaps against steel. Across the channel, lightning flashes without thunder. It isn't weather, it's artillery. Hargreaves kneels beside Tommy, adjusting the collar. You'll hear things. Lead, he says softly. Just remember your path. Find them. Bring it back. The dog presses his head briefly into the man's hand. Cut to the horizon. Black ships on a silver sea. Thousands of them, carrying the weight of history. Somewhere among them is a small wooden boat marked S-17, rocking gently as dawn stains the clouds. Inside, a man and his dog wait for a world to catch fire. Back in England, in a quiet office, a secretary logs the mission dispatch. Courier units active. Normandy. The pencil pauses before the line for individual identification. She hesitates, then writes simply, "Tommy, Field Operative." That single line will outlast many typed reports. Because within days, radios will crackle and die again. Wires will be cut, antennas destroyed. The fate of entire companies will hang on the narrow window between silence and response, and inside that window, the messengers will run. The narrator's voice fades in, steady, almost reverent. While the world prepared to speak through machines, the British prepared for silence. And when silence came, they answered it with loyalty. The scene fades to black, the faint sound of a heartbeat under static. Then, one line appears on screen in white letters. June 1944, Normandy. Radios will fail. Tommy will run. Normandy. June 8, 1944. The sea still smells of fuel and fear. Charred landing craft lie half buried in sand, like broken ribs. A low fog crawls inland, smothering the sound of waves and replacing it with something heavier. Silence threaded with distant gunfire. A black and white frame opens on a narrow lane, bordered by hedgerows, so high they feel like walls. Sergeant Hargreaves moves, crouched, rifle slung, eyes darting between the map in his hand and the dog padding silently beside him. Tommy's paws leave faint prints in the wet earth, each one filling instantly with rain. Behind them, the men of the 6th Airborne's Communications Unit carry the weight of wire reels and field radios that no longer hum. The sets had burned out within hours of landing, fried by water, sand, and shrapnel. Messages from command have stopped. The front line is blind. Hargreaves kneels, running a finger across the map. "HQ's at Ranville," he mutters. "If we can't reach them by signal, we reach them by heart." He looks at Tommy. "You remember the run?" "Lad." The dog tilts his head, tail flicking once. The answer is wordless but absolute. A messenger tube is fastened to the collar. The latch checked twice. Inside, a folded slip stamped "Urgent Artillery Request." If HQ doesn't receive it within the hour, an isolated company will be left without support when the Germans counterattack. The sergeant crouches low, hands trembling just once as he ties the knot. "Go on then. Make it count." Tommy sprints forward, body hugging the ditch line. The world narrows to smell and vibration. Rain, cordite, damp soil, a whiff of machine oil, the signatures of war. His route winds through a landscape stripped of color. Fields cratered by shellfire, trees torn into silhouettes. A camera angle from ground level tracks his movement, each stride a metronome of survival. Bullets hiss somewhere behind. They belong to another story now. Tommy runs under fences, over collapsed walls, through the skeletal remains of an orchard where apples hang like ghosts. At a crossroads, smoke drifts low. A burned-out half-track blocks the lane. The smell of fuel is sharp enough to sting. Tommy stops, nose working. Somewhere beneath the wreck, something moves. A faint sound, metal tapping. Then a groan. A wounded British signaller lies trapped, leg pinned by debris. When he opens his eyes, he sees not rescue but a small, mud-coated dog staring back at him. He whispers, "Good boy, you still running." Tommy circles once, whining softly. The man reaches for the message tube but stops himself. "No," he rasps. "Don't waste it on me. Go for a heartbeat." The camera lingers. Man and animal framed in ruin, breath visible in the cold air. Then Tommy slips away, vanishing into the fog like a promise kept for later. The route grows harder. German mortar rounds fall irregularly. Bursts of white dust and silence. Each explosion erases landmarks. The hedgerows become mazes. Still, the dog finds the scent trail left by the sergeant's hand hours earlier, a mixture of tobacco, soap, and trust. A black and white flash. Tommy crawling under a barbed wire gap, fur snagging, drawing a thin line of blood that beads, glimmers, and vanishes in rain. He reaches a stream swollen from the night's storm. The current chatters over stones, cold enough to bite. Without hesitation, he leaps in. The tube knocks against his chest. Waterlogged but sealed. Midstream, a shot cracks a rifle. Splinters of water leap around him. He paddles harder, head low, until the far bank rises and he scrambles up through nettles and mud. Cut to headquarters. Ranville, inside a shattered farmhouse. Captain Mason leans over a dead radio set, tapping the key as if willpower might conjure signal. A corporal beside him shakes his head. Nothing but static. Sir, Mason exhales. The artillery grid is blind. If the Germans break through the hedgerows before dawn, his men will be cut off. Runners, he asks. All gone. Sir, he rubs his temple, eyes hollow. Then, God help whoever's still out there. Outside, the rain thickens. Somewhere beyond the field, a shape moves low and fast. A sentry stiffens, raises his rifle, then lowers it. Sir, something coming? Tommy bursts from the brush, soaked, mud-splattered, collar glinting faintly. The sentry shouts, "Messenger dog." The captain meets him halfway. Dropping to one knee as if before a miracle, he unclips the tube, hands shaking from cold and disbelief. Inside, coordinates, timing, signatures all intact. He stares for a moment, then barks to the artillery officer, "We've got it. Fire mission Alpha immediate." Within minutes, field guns roar. The sound rolls through the valley, echoing like thunder given purpose. Shells arc overhead, slamming into enemy positions that had been creeping closer, unseen. The ground trembles. Men in trenches shout with a joy that sounds like defiance. Mason looks back at the dog. "Who sent you?" He murmurs. The answer is a wag of a tail. Half exhaustion, half pride. An aide wraps Tommy in a blanket, rubbing his fur dry. "We'll send him back with confirmation." The captain says, "They'll want to know it worked." A new message is written. Mission successful. Counterattack repelled. "Thank you." It's tucked carefully into the tube. "Ready him?" Mason orders. The soldier hesitates. "Sir." He's limping. Mason crouches again. The dog's right forepaw bears a shallow cut, still bleeding. He ties a strip of cloth around it, white against the dark fur. Then make it tight. He's got another mile to be a hero. Tommy looks toward the doorway, ears twitching at each thunder of outgoing shells. His world is noise and smell again, smoke, men shouting, the bitter tang of cordite. He steps forward once, twice, then runs. The return path is worse. The lane he came by is now cratered, and trees burn like torches. He detours through an orchard, past the same wreck where the wounded signaler still lies. This time, Tommy pauses. The man's eyes are closed, lips pale. The dog noses his hand, then the man's pack, and finds a tag metal, stamped with numbers. He takes it gently in his mouth and moves on. By the time he reaches the original command post, dawn is bleeding into sky. Hargreaves stands outside, scanning the mist, every muscle tight with waiting. When he sees movement on the lane, a small shape limping, but determined, he forgets to breathe. Tommy. The dog stumbles the last few yards and collapses against his boots. The sergeant drops to his knees, pulling the collar free. The paper inside is damp but readable. He hands it to the captain. "It's from Ranville." "Sir?" The captain unfolds it, eyes widening. Artillery hit the mark. They're safe. The message passes from hand to hand until everyone in the post has touched it, as if touching proof that something pure still exists in war. Hargreaves lifts Tommy, cradling him like a child. The camera focuses on the bandaged paw, the mud-matted fur, the slow, steady breathing. For a long moment, no one speaks. Outside, the guns fall silent. Only rain remains soft, endless, forgiving. A narrator's voice, low and even, fills the quiet. He carried more than words that night. He carried connection between men who could not see each other, between orders and survival, between life and what might have been lost. In the following days, reports will note, dog returned with confirmation under fire. No hesitation. Nothing about the stream, the rifle shot, or the wounded man whose tag Tommy brought back will be mentioned. War has no time for details that feel like grace, but those who saw it will remember. The final shot fades to black and white stillness. Hargreaves sitting by the kennel, dawn light catching the curve of the dog's ear, one hand resting on the worn collar. The sound of distant radios crackling back to life filters in. Faint, but rising. The war's machines are speaking again. But for one long, precious night, a heartbeat carried the message instead. And that is how Tommy earned his silence. Morning arrived like forgiveness. The rain had stopped, and the world was pale muted greens and grays washed by the long night. The hedgerows still smoked. The ground still trembled now and then. But the air felt changed. The guns were silent, not because the war had ended, but because just for a few hours the message had made it through. In the black and white frame, Sergeant Hargreaves stands beside the ruined farmhouse that served as the command post. His uniform is caked with mud. His eyes are rimmed red from exhaustion. At his feet, Tommy lies curled beneath a canvas coat, breathing slow and steady. The sergeant looks down at him, then out across the field toward Ranville, where a thin trail of smoke rises like a prayer. A runner approaches from HQ carrying a sheet of paper folded twice, edges damp. He salutes, hands it over. Hargreaves unfolds it. At the top, to all ranks, 6th Airborne Communications Section. Below, typed in uneven strokes, message received under fire. Artillery strike successful. Enemy advance halted. Commendation recommended for handler and dog. Captain Mason. The sergeant reads it once, lips barely moving. Then he crouches, pressing the paper gently beside Tommy's head. You hear that? Lad. They know. They bloody know. The camera lingers on the dog's eyes fluttering open. No dramatics. Just a soft acknowledgement, like the nod of someone who already understood before being told. Later that day, when the company moves out toward new positions, the medics check Tommy's bandaged paw. The wound is shallow, already closing. He'll walk again. One says, stubborn one. This, Hargreaves just smiles faintly. Same as his men. In the days that follow, word of the run spreads quietly through the division. No official dispatches announce it, no newspapers print it. But among soldiers, especially those who spent the night waiting in the dark, stories travel faster than radio waves. They say the dog came through shellfire without flinching. They say he crossed a river when the bridge was gone. They say he carried not one message, but two. And though each retelling adds a little more myth, the heart of it remains true. When headquarters later compiles the official record, Tommy's name appears once, buried in the appendix. War dog no? 347A, successful dispatch run. 6th June, 8th of June, 1944. Normandy sector, no hesitation. Those two words, no hesitation, become his epitaph. A cut to the War Dog Training School at Northaw. Months later, autumn sunlight spills through the trees, painting long shadows over the parade ground. Rows of handlers stand in formation, dogs at heel. An officer steps forward with a clipboard. Today, he announces, we recognize those animals and men whose service ensured communication under impossible conditions. When Hargreaves and Tommy step forward, the assembled men fall quiet. There is no fanfare, no music, just the sound of boots on gravel and the flap of a flag in the wind. The medal presented is small, a brass disc engraved with a laurel and the letters PDSA Dickin Medal. Around the rim, the words, for gallantry, we also serve. As the medal is fastened to Tommy's collar, he gives a small shake. The medal catching the light. The crowd chuckles softly, then cheers. Hargreaves salutes. That moment is captured in one grainy photograph. A soldier bent beside a dog, both looking somewhere beyond the frame. It will later hang in a museum, though few who pass it will know the story behind the mud on the man's boots or the faint scar on the dog's paw. Back in Normandy, months after the battle, the landscape has begun to heal. Farmers return to their fields, craters become ponds. Children collect shell casings, polishing them into toys. Amid the quiet reconstruction, a few soldiers stay behind to rebury their fallen comrades. Among them, Hargreaves kneels once more, not over a grave, but near a hedge where, on that night, he last saw Tommy vanish into the fog. He kneels and places something small in the earth. A collar, worn smooth. The nameplate still legible, Tommy. He isn't burying a body. He's burying time. The narration returns, calm and reflective. Not every messenger returned. Many vanished between the lines, carrying words that never arrived. But each one proved a truth the war tried to forget, that even in the age of machines, the most reliable signals still came from loyalty. Archival clips fade in, dogs being trained to crawl under wire, handlers whispering in their ears before sending them off, dispatch tubes being sealed and kissed for luck. All in flickering black and white, as if the film itself trembles under the weight of memory. One final record from the British War Office scrolls across the screen. During the Second World War, more than 7 Leral dogs served in the British Army. They acted as sentries, scouts, mine detectors, and messengers. Hundreds were decorated. Many never returned. The voice continues. Tommy was one of them, a nameless hero to the history books, but unforgettable to the men he served. Cut to an old man's voice, Hargreaves, recorded years later for a BBC radio interview in the 1960s. His voice trembles but carries warmth. He wasn't trained for glory, just for trust. When the radios went dead, he made sure we still spoke. We owe him more than a medal. We owe him the sound of each other's voices still being heard. The tape clicks, silence follows, and the film holds on a still image. Tommy running through mist, tube glinting at his throat, body blurred by motion and rain. Then a fade to present day modern color for the first time. A visitor stands in front of a glass display case at the Imperial War Museum. Inside lies a collar, faded, with a tag that reads 347A, Tommy. The visitor reads the label, frowns softly, and moves on. The camera stays, watching the faint reflection of the collar against the glass, a reminder that history often whispers, never shouts. The narration closes in quiet reverence. When the world fell silent, he carried a voice, not through cables or code, but through courage. He crossed fire and darkness to remind men that they were not alone. And though time moved on and the machines grew louder, the echo of his run still lingers between the hedgerows of Normandy. A black screen fades in with the final caption. White text centered, War Dog Tommy, Normandy, 1944. Message delivered. No hesitation. Fade to silence. The years that followed buried the noise. The fields of Normandy grew green again. The hedgerows filled with birdsong instead of bullets. The craters softened into ponds where frogs now croak at dusk. The barns that once hid radios and men are just barns again. But if you stand there early in the morning, when the mist still lingers low and the air smells of wet soil, you might feel something older than peace, a faint rhythm underfoot, as if memory itself has a pulse. A black and white frame fades in, then slowly shifts to muted color. The same lane where Tommy once ran, now lined with wildflowers. The camera moves low, close to the ground, where paw prints used to press into mud 70 years ago. The narrator's voice returns quiet, measured and warm. Every war leaves ghosts. Some are made of iron, some of silence, and some, like Tommy's, are made of faith, the kind that doesn't ask why, only how far. When historians write of the Second World War, they measure in divisions, in tonnage, in days and fronts and casualties. They rarely measure in footsteps the small distances that changed everything. But that is how Tommy's story endures, not as a tale of strategy, but of steps, each one taken without knowing if it would end in home or nothing. Sergeant Hargreaves once wrote, in a letter found after his death, I've served beside men of every kind, brave, foolish, weary, kind, but I've never seen trust like his. When I gave him a message, it wasn't just paper he carried. It was belief. He believed it mattered, and that made it true. That sentence, tucked into the corner of a fading letter, says more about loyalty than a shelf of medals ever could. Because what Tommy carried wasn't just a signal between units, it was connection, the same invisible thread that binds people when everything else fails, the same instinct that drives us to reach out in darkness, to bridge silence, to be heard and to hear. In VAR, men learn to destroy with precision. But Tommy's run was about creation, the fragile art of keeping life bound together through faith alone. The narrator continues. In an age of wires and frequencies, His message was simple. Trust is faster than technology. A slow montage begins archival photographs of other war dogs. Judy with her sailors in the Pacific. Bing beside his parachute harness. Ricky carrying a wounded soldier's glove. Their eyes all share the same quiet clarity, the same readiness to move when called. It's here that the reflection widens beyond history. The film cuts to scenes of the modern world city skylines glittering with communication towers, soldiers with headsets, drones tracing patterns through clouds. So much signal, so much noise. And yet, for all our devices, we still falter when the human line breaks. Maybe that's the echo of this story that, even now, in the hum of the modern century, silence still matters. That connection still demands courage. That somewhere in our need to be heard lies a lesson older than language. Loyalty endures when logic falters. The camera pans across an old veteran's home. A retired handler sits in a chair, eyes clouded but smiling faintly as a therapy dog rests its head on his knee. His hand trembles as he strokes its fur. The old man doesn't know the dog's name. He doesn't have to. The gesture is the message. Cut to a young soldier at a memorial in London, kneeling before the bronze statue of a messenger dog. Around the statue's neck, a single poppy. The inscription reads, "They also served." The narrator's tone softens. For every story of tanks and generals, there are the ones of hands and hearts. They rarely make it into textbooks, but they are the reason we still understand what words like courage, duty, and love mean. The war dogs never read the orders they carried. They never understood strategy, politics, or hate. But they knew something simpler, that when someone they trusted said, "Go," they went, and sometimes that is enough to save the world. Black and white footage returns Tommy running through mist, replayed in slow motion. His body moves like music without sound, his eyes fixed forward, unafraid. In a world obsessed with speaking, the narrator says, "He taught us the strength of listening to instinct, to purpose, to the quiet voice that says, 'Keep going.'" The reflection deepens, turning almost philosophical. Maybe that's why these stories stay, because they remind us that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just runs. That faith isn't a speech, it's a direction, and that the smallest creature can carry the heaviest hope if someone believes in it. The film lingers on a detail from the very beginning, a black leather collar, the nameplate worn but visible. Tommy. That one word becomes a symbol, not of an animal, but of a truth. When everything fails, radio, command, certainty, trust remains the last communication line. A slow fade shows modern soldiers during training, crouched beside dogs who now detect bombs instead of messages. The tasks have changed, but the partnership hasn't. A bond of heartbeat and breath, of motion and meaning. The narrator closes the reflection with a simple truth. Technology will keep changing. Wires will get thinner. Signals will get faster. But courage still moves at the speed of trust. And sometimes, the clearest messages aren't heard at all. They're felt. The final visual fades to a misty dawn in Normandy again. The field is quiet. A light breeze ripples through tall grass. For a moment, we hear the faintest echo of footsteps, soft, rhythmic, receding. Then the last line appears, white on black. In a world of noise, the truest messages are still carried in silence. Fade to black. The screen stays black for a few seconds longer than comfort allows. Then a soft hum rises, not music, but the sound of an old radio warming to life. Static crackles. A faint voice, almost lost in the noise, repeats a simple word. Message received. Fade in. The Normandy field at dawn. Mist curls through the hedgerows, pale light spilling over the grass. The war is long over, but the silence it left behind still feels sacred. The narrator begins quietly, almost as if speaking to one person. These are the stories time almost forgot. The ones without medals in museums or parades in streets. The ones carried not in headlines, but in heartbeats. The camera moves slowly across an old display case in the Imperial War Museum. Tommy's collar, still resting under glass. Its edges are cracked, the brass tag dulled to the color of earth. A small card beneath it reads, Messenger Dog, Normandy, 1944. Name, Tommy. It's a small thing, almost invisible among the larger artifacts, uniforms, weapons, radios. But when the light catches the nameplate, something happens. For a moment, it's as if the silence speaks again. The narrator continues, when the radios went silent, and men feared the line had broken, he ran through darkness to keep their voices connected. He didn't know what freedom was, or strategy, or command. He only knew trust, and he carried it until it became light. The tone deepens no longer just about one dog, but about every forgotten soul who kept others alive when the world turned to noise and fire. History remembers the powerful, but it survives because of the loyal. It survives because someone somewhere refused to let silence win. A montage unfolds, soldiers laughing with dogs between battles, a nurse feeding a pup born in a bombed-out street, a handler's hand brushing dust from a small brass tag. Each shot dissolves into the next, like fading memories tied together by compassion. The narrator's voice lowers. Tommy's story is not just a memory of war. It's a message for peace that loyalty, courage, and connection are what carry us through every silence, not only in battlefields, but in life itself. Cut to modern day, a young woman walking her dog through a quiet park at dawn. The leash glints faintly in the light. The dog stops, ears twitching, as if hearing something deep beneath the morning calm. The woman smiles, unaware of the echo beneath her feet, the same soil once crossed by others long ago. The narrator's tone softens into something personal, almost whispered. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage doesn't always wear a uniform, and heroes sometimes walk on four legs, keep their memory alive. A pause. The sound of the radio fades again, returning to gentle static. Because history isn't written only by men with ranks or medals. Sometimes it's carried quietly, by four paws, by trust, by love that expected nothing in return. The music swells, faintly strings, slow and reflective, as if the film itself is taking a breath. Subscribe, share, remember, not for the views, not for the numbers, but so the world keeps hearing what silence once almost erased. These are not just war stories. They are reminders of what it means to be human. Cut to black and white archival footage, Tommy's silhouette sprinting through smoke, a hand unclipping the message tube. The words, no hesitation, typed in a report. Then a simple image, Hargreaves' old handwriting on yellow paper, looping and careful. Good lad. Brought it home. Awe. The narrator speaks one final time, voice steady and calm, as the black screen fades to white. Sometimes the smallest messenger carries the greatest message, that even in darkness, we are still connected. That even when all else fails, loyalty finds a way. The frame lingers on a single line of text, white on black, as the music quiets into silence. Because history isn't written only by men. Sometimes it's carried by four paws. A soft click. The radio cuts out. Silence pure. Perfect. Then, as if from nowhere, the faint echo of footsteps begins again. Rhythmic, steady, still running. Fade to black.